So what if we have many jurors, right? So the number of jurors now is n, and every juror other than our beloved juror 1 votes to acquit when the signal is B, and votes to convict when the signal is G. And type B of juror 1 has no effect on the outcome of the trial when every other juror's signal is G. So therefore, when voting, juror 1 should assume all other signals received by other jurors are G. Sorry, this should say no effect on outcome unless every other juror's signal is G. So therefore, when voting, juror 1 should assume that all other signals are G, just like we had with the 2 jurors. So for type B of juror 1, so juror 1 receiving signal B, acquittal is at least as good as conviction if the probability that the defendant is guilty given that juror 1 signal is B and every other signal is G is at most Z. So this is important given that juror 1 signal is B and every other signal is G is at most Z. And the probability that the defendant is guilty given that juror 1 signal is B and everyone else's signals are G is equal to the probability of B of juror 1 signal being B and everyone else's signal being G, given that the defendant is guilty, multiplied by the probability of guilt, divided by the total probability of juror 1 getting a signal B and everyone else getting a signal G. So PRB G given guilt multiplied by PRG plus PRB everyone else saying guilty given innocence multiplied by the probability of innocence, which is equal to 1 minus p to the power of n minus 1 pi divided by 1 minus p to the power of n minus 1 times pi plus q 1 minus q to the power of n minus 1 times 1 minus pi. And this is juror 1. This is every other juror. And this is the probability that the defendant is guilty. And this is the total probability that juror 1 receives signal B and all the others receive signal G. So, type B of juror 1 votes for acquittal if Z is greater than or equal to the expression we just had. Pi divided by 1 minus p minus 1 times pi plus q 1 minus q of n minus 1 minus pi, which is actually equal to 1 over 1 plus q over 1 minus p multiplied by 1 minus q over p to the power of n minus 1 multiplied by 1 minus pi over pi. So what we did here was that we divided the numerator and the denominator by this expression. Now, since P is greater than 1 minus Q, as we looked at early in the beginning, the denominator decreases to 1 as n increases, right? Because as n increases, the expression 1 minus q over p to the power of n minus 1 decreases. Because 1 minus q is less than p, so 1 minus q over p is going to be less than 1. And anything less than 1 to the power of a high n, the higher the n becomes, the smaller the number within the brackets becomes. And therefore, this expression becomes less than 1. And this expression becomes more than 1, but not at the same rate as this one, as this one decreases. So therefore, the lower bound on Z, for which type B of juror 1 votes for acquittal, approaches 1 as n increases. So as this expression decreases to much smaller than 1, then this whole expression approaches 0, and 1 plus 0 is or 1 plus a small number, this whole bottom expression approaches 1 or just higher than 1, the whole denominator, and 1 over an expression just higher than 1 is around 0.999 or something close to 1, right? And what all this means is that the lower bound on Z approaches 1 as n increases. Okay? And this kind of makes sense. So what would happen then, that in a large jury, if jurors care about acquitting a guilty defendant, then a juror who interprets the evidence to point to innocence will still vote for conviction. And the reason why is the vote of a juror who interprets the evidence to point to innocence makes a difference only if every other juror interprets the evidence to point to guilt. In which case, if that happens, the probability of the defendant being in fact guilty is very, very high. Sorry. Right? So, because the vote of a juror who interprets the evidence to point to innocence makes a difference only if everyone else points to guilty, if every other juror interprets the evidence to point to guilty, then by then, the probability that the defendant is actually guilty is in fact very, very high. And hence in a large jury, if jurors care about acquitting a guilty defendant, then a juror who interprets the evidence to point to innocence will still vote for conviction.